Today we're going to talk about 15 movies, not all horror movies, but they all contain horror games. So obviously we know about Saw. Saw is probably the first movie that people think of when you think of horror game movie. So if you're in the mood for a horror game, but you've seen all the Saw movies, or they're just not your thing, then this list is for you. Anyway, starting off strong with one of my favorite 90s movies of all time that I've talked about many times on the channel, Cube. Without remembering how they got there, several strangers awaken in a prison of cubic cells, some of them booby-trapped. The prisoners must use their combined skills if they are to escape. I love the way that Cube was filmed. It's actually all filmed within one cube cell, and they just changed the colors and effects depending on what cell they were meant to be in the movie, so the set was kind of small. But this is one of those movies that's a great rewatch. It's a fun kind of movie in my opinion, and this is one of the movies on the list that leans a little bit more like a puzzle game. It's just a highly entertaining watch. So I'm going to go through this video kind of quickly because there's 15 recommendations for you, and I don't want to dwell too much on each one individually, so I will have all of them listed down below in the description as well as the chapters, so you can jump around to the ones you haven't seen. Next up we have Escape Room. Now this came out in 2019. I don't recommend the sequel, unless you watch like the alternate ending, which I've yet to do, but apparently that solves a lot of issues that I had with the sequel of it. 6 adventurous strangers travel to a mysterious building to experience the escape room, a game where players compete to solve puzzles to win $10,000. What starts out as seemingly innocent fun soon turns into a living nightmare as the 4 men and 2 women discover each room is an elaborate trap that's part of a sadistic game of life or death. This is a very mild version of Saw, I would say. I mean, you can't compare them. They're very different. But this is like Saw, where they kind of have to work together to escape and face, you know, go through all these puzzles. Obviously, if you've ever done an escape room, you know how this kind of concept works, but they have to work together or, you know, get left behind in the room. What makes this so enjoyable for me personally are the rooms. I feel like they're so creative and so like massive. It's hard to explain, but they're just visually stunning. I love the different effects and the different variations of room and puzzles that they could possibly solve. And then I think the story is a really good idea to build upon a movie about an escape room. And I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say it's all kind of intertwined in their personal lives. Next up, we have one of the most gruesome and gory movies on this list, Would You Rather. Iris and 7 other desperate people become trapped in Shepard's mansion. Shepard forces them to play a sadistic game for a large sum of money, but the dilemmas become increasingly deadly. This is not a puzzle game type movie. This is definitely, can you just survive? Can you get through the games? They all have to do with physical harm or, yeah, pretty much physical harm. So it's gory. This stars Brittany Snow as the lead, and I think she does fantastic in this. And let me just say, this movie is heavy. It's a lot. It's not a casual watch in my opinion. It's still fun, I think, because you're like super interested in seeing if they're going to complete them and also what the tasks are, because of course they get more and more gruesome and you're just like, where are they going to go from here? And the tension is just constantly building throughout this movie, and then the ending. That's all I'm gonna say. Next up, we have a more recent movie, probably the most recent on this list, of Meander. A woman loses consciousness while traveling along a deserted road, waking up to find herself locked in a series of bizarre tubes filled with dangerous traps. She has no choice but to crawl forward and confront the wounds of her past trauma. This is such an underrated movie from 2020. I loved this movie. I believe it's streaming on Amazon Prime. It is a French film, some of it is in English, but I think this was just so well executed and the acting was actually really good. I think this is a little bit of like a indie, I don't want to say indie movie, but like a little lower budget. It wasn't, you know, a super wide theatrical release or anything like that, but I really like it. It's like claustrophobic, but also kind of like escape room. There's like different puzzles, but she's fighting these things in the tunnels, let me tell you, and it is kind of bizarre in a way. It's not as straightforward as it sounds, and I loved the bizarre twist on it, and the ending shot, like the final scene, is just beautiful and I loved it. And the story made me cry too. So next we have a very cheesy gem of Stay Alive. Teenagers decide to pass idle time by playing an online game that has a horror theme, but the action taking place on their computer screens becomes a terrifying reality when they realize that each time a character dies during the game, the figure's human overseer dies as well. I included this in this video because although it's not like a puzzle they have to solve or, you know, surviving traps or anything like that, it's legitimately a game. Like, it's literally a game, a horror game that they're playing that also reflects reality. So it still applies, I think, in this category. And anytime I get to talk about Stay Alive, I'm going to, because it is just one of the cheesiest movies, but in the best way possible for the era. If you're a fan of cheesy 2000s movies from like 2000, I mean, this is from 2006. If you're a fan of that era, cheesiness, the fashion, everything about it is just incredible. And it's fun. It's fun, and I think genuinely creepy at times. I think some of the visuals from the game are effective. I know that's weird, but it just, it works for me. Next is a movie called Exam. 8 candidates for a highly desirable corporate job are locked together in an exam room and given a final test with just one seemingly simple question. However, it doesn't take long for confusion to ensue and tensions to unravel. Obviously, these movies are all similar to each other, and I keep comparing them to each other. They're all horror games, right? But if I were to compare, this is kind of like Escape Room as well, where they are trapped in this room and they're not trying to figure out how to get out. They're trying to answer a question for the exam that they're trying to take to see who's the best candidate. And so it's a good twist on that kind of concept of trying to figure out what the question is, what the answer is, and then obviously they're competing against each other, so there's that competition and that tension between them. Now, is some of the acting pretty bad? Yeah. But I think it's a fun watch. I think it's streaming free on Tubi, and it's an effective movie. I think it's entertaining and very more on the lighter side, you know, not a lot of gore, kind of like escape room level horror, if you even want to call it that. Next up, we have Battle Royale. 42 ninth graders are sent to a deserted island. They're given a map, food, and various weapons. An explosive collar is fitted around their neck, and if they break a rule, the collar explodes. Their mission is to kill each other and be the last one standing. This is just a classic movie, and obviously inspired a lot of things. Like the Battle Royale concept alone is just one of my favorite concepts of anything. Video games, movies, books, stories, anything like that. Hunger Games, obviously, PUBG, you know. But this is like the OG. This was my first introduction to this kind of concept and style of horror, or horror game, if you will. So obviously, if you like Hunger Games, I don't want to compare it to that, but Hunger Games was clearly inspired by Battle Royale or something similar, a similar story to that, where obviously they have to kill each other until there's only one winner. And it's good. It's really good. It's turn of the century, so it's right at 2000, year 2000 it came out, which iconic, great year for movies. But I love the various characters that we're following and how they kill each other and all the different kinds of weapons. I just think it's really entertaining. Next up, we have kind of a more lighter movie, I would say, of Circle. Held captive and faced with their imminent executions, 50 strangers are forced to choose the one person among them who deserves to live. This one's fascinating as well. I feel like this is such a clever horror game because there's so many of them and they have to decide who lives or dies, and then they all vote, and whoever they all vote on dies. So one by one they are, you know, casually just voting each other to die. And there's nothing graphic about this. The way that they actually die is, you know, very interesting. It's not gory or graphic, so it's nothing disturbing going on here. But then I love that argument of like who deserves to live the most, right? Because there's a pregnant woman, there's elderly, there's children. Who deserves to live, right? Next, we have a recent watch, first time watch for me, of Truth or Dare. It's cheesy, it's a cheesy one. Olivia Lucas and a group of their college friends travel to Mexico for one last getaway before graduation. While there, a stranger convinces one of the students to play a seemingly harmless game of Truth or Dare with the others. Once the game starts, it awakens something evil, a demon, which forces the friends to share dark secrets and confront their deepest fears. Now, this very cheesy level of Bye Bye Man, The Gallows, Ouija, you know, just like those kind of not fantastic horror movies, but highly, highly entertaining for some reason, because sometimes we don't want serious movies all the time. We need some like goofy fun ones that aren't great, but are just fun ones. So this is definitely one of those. It stars Lucy Hale. I don't know why that's important. I just thought I'd point that out. But yeah, basically if you don't do the truth or dare, whatever you choose, you die. If you stop playing, you die. It's a very straightforward movie. And yes, the horror in it is very cheesy. This is I would say this is almost cheesier and worse than Stay Alive because I mean, I just love the year, you know, of the early 2000s, mid 2000s, whatever. That will always save a movie for me if it is kind of on the cheesier side. This one is very, very cheesy, but for the right audience, if that's something that you're looking for, I think it's really fun. Casual watch, I just threw it on for fun, and yeah, easy watch. Next up, we have Ready or Not. Grace couldn't be happier after she marries the man of her dreams at his family's luxurious estate. There's just one catch. She must now hide from midnight until dawn while her in-laws hunt her down with guns, crossbows, and other weapons. This is the classic game of hide and seek, of course, with a twist where if you're found, you die. But also you die by hand of your in-laws. So again, this is a fun one. I think it's very lighthearted. There is some genuine funny moments. This is meant to be kind of more of a comedy, dark comedy, I would say. I think this movie really made me love Samara Weaving. Like, this is the one that really exposed me to Samara's talents, and I think she was the perfect actor for this role. Next up, we have one of the most underrated movies probably of all time that no one really talked about because it came out right at the beginning of the pandemic. This was actually the last movie I saw before everything shut down, and that is The Hunt. 12 strangers wake up in a clearing. They don't know where they are or how they got there. In the shadow of a dark internet conspiracy theory, ruthless elitists gather at a remote location to hunt humans for sport. Now, I don't want to say too much about this movie because the experience of viewing the opening scene for the first time, I don't want to take that from anybody because when I saw that, it was so entertaining. I love this movie. I think it's really funny. Obviously, there's a political theme to it of, you know, liberals, conservatives, right? But I think it was done so smartly. It's not like showing any one side is better than the other. I think it makes both sides look terrible, which is part of the fun. We can all laugh at ourselves and whatever political party we're associated with, right? We all have a sense of humor, right? Anyway, but the performances in this, fantastic. The blind sides, the twists and turns, the actors cast in this, everything about this. I love this movie so much. It's also a great rewatch. I rewatch it all the time. It is such a good movie. Next up, we have a movie that I actually saw in theaters, didn't love it, but now I own it on DVD and I rewatch it. And I don't know why, but I like it. It's the Belko Experiment. An ordinary day at the office becomes a horrific quest for survival when 80 employees at the Belko Corps in Bogota, Colombia learn that they are pawns in a deadly game. This is like if Battle Royale took place in an office building with your coworkers. And also kind of similar to Circle in that they have to decide who they're gonna kill, right? Because there's these ultimatums that they have to reach, like 2 people within 30 minutes. So they have to decide who those 2 people are going to be. This definitely grew on me. I think this is a really fun movie. Does it make sense conceptually? Not a lot of these movies do, not gonna lie. But it's a fun one, and you know, I feel like it's a great setting. I mean, I think the setting alone of like this corporation and like all these people have to kill each other, and there's the interns, there's the like servicemen, there's the custodians, then you have like the upper elites that are working there, the CEO, the bosses, you know, all going at it trying to be the ones to survive. So it's very entertaining. The next one I would consider kind of a horror game, but it's definitely light on the game side. So this might be a stretch, but I'm going to include House on Haunted Hill. A millionaire with theatrical tendencies, Stephen Price, invites a number of people to stay in a vast, creepy building that used to be an insane asylum. Stephen, accompanied by his bitter wife Evelyn, offers $1 million to anyone who can stay the whole night without leaving out of fear. Now, of course, they become trapped in this mansion and they aren't alone, right? It's a haunted mansion and there are spirits and they are angry. I think genuinely this has some of my favorite horror visuals of the times. So this came out in 1999 and genuinely scary. You cannot tell me this movie is not horrifying. I think it's not taken as seriously because of how it's executed, and it is a little bit lighthearted at times, and the characters are like kind of goofy, so that kind of takes away from the horror elements. But if this was taken more seriously, I mean, it's creepy. It's scary, okay? But also, I'm a sucker for this kind of setting where they have to go stay somewhere haunted overnight and see if they can make it and survive. It's a great story. If you like that story, I highly recommend Scream Queen by Ido von Belkom, the book. I've read that multiple times. I love that story. It's similar, but it's a reality show that they're filming and they have to survive the night, and yeah, they're staying in a haunted house. Next up, one that I had to include despite how cheesy it really is, but that has not stopped me for any of these movies so far. So I'm gonna include Ouija. Following the sudden death of her best friend Debbie, Lane finds an antique Ouija board in Debbie's room and tries to use it to say goodbye. Instead, she makes contact with a spirit that calls itself DZ. As strange events begin to occur, Lane enlists others to help her determine DZ's identity and what it wants. Now, is Ouija Origin of Evil better? Absolutely. That's done by Mike Flanagan and very underrated for a sequel. I think that definitely stands alone as a great movie, as opposed to it being seen as kind of like a second in a series of Ouija. Because Ouija, let me tell you, super cheesy, but I think it's fun. It's fun in all the other ways that the other movies are cheesy and not to be taken too seriously. And it does have some of those horror elements from, I mean, this came out in 2014. It feels very 2010s horror. Something about it is just very 2010s, and in a good way. I feel like we can look back, and though it feels dated, we can, you know, have a little appreciation for this era of horror. Okay, the last movie we're going to talk about is not a horror movie at all, and it is definitely the lightest, lighthearted movie on this list, but I knew I had to include it despite it not even being a horror game technically, and that is Nerve. Industrious high school senior V is tired of living life on the sidelines. Pressured by her friends, V decides to join Nerve, a popular online game that challenges players to accept a series of dares. It's not long before the adrenaline-fueled competition requires her to perform increasingly dangerous stunts. Like I said, lighthearted, there's a little bit of romance going on, a little bit will they, won't they, just very light but fun. It's a very enjoyable movie. I'm not like the biggest fan of Emma Roberts as an actor, but I feel like she was kind of appropriate for this role. It's not my favorite role that she's ever done, but Nerve is a fun watch and definitely entertaining and still a game, and it's kind of like the Running Man. That's the weirdest comparison I could probably make to this movie, but similar, right? Not really. Not really. I'm gonna say it's similar. You know what? I'm gonna double down and say Nerve is like The Running Man. Anyway, Nerve is good and has a good soundtrack, so I still recommend it if you like any of the other movies on this list. Have a fun time watching it. So there you have 15 horror game movie recommendations that aren't Saw, because I don't know, I think we're all kind of tired of Saw. That's like the OG horror game, even though some of these came out before Saw. That's just like the most famous one, so we need to like move on from Saw, even though we're getting another Saw this year. And I'll watch it and I'll review it because I'm a sucker for Saw movies. But, you know, if you want something else, here's 15 other movies you could watch instead. If you can think of any other horror game type movies, horror or not, leave a recommendation down below in the comments, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.